Welcome to Simple SQL. Today we're going to be making a database. If you're following along from the previous episode, you might already have Management Studio open. If not, go ahead and launch it now and connect to your local copy of SQL Server. Over on the left-hand side, we've got our Object Explorer, and inside here we have a tree view. This very top element here is the server that we're connected to, and you can see that we have a tree node for databases that we can expand. Underneath databases, you can see that there are system databases and database snapshots, but if we had any user-defined databases, we would see them here, and we don't have any. Let's go up to the top and click on New Query. When we do this, a query window opens on the right-hand side, and this query window automatically makes a connection to whatever instance of SQL Server we last selected in the Object Explorer. If we had selected a database, it would have connected to that database, but since we haven't, it's gone to our default, which is master. Master is one of the system databases, and we can get into more about what that is later, but for right now, just know that the command we're going to execute is just fine to execute against the master database. The command we need is create database, which is just create database, and you can see that the text is highlighting in blue, letting us know that it's keywords for SQL Server, and then we're going to give it a database name. In our case, we're going to call it Simple SQL. So now we've got this command here that says create database Simple SQL. To run this, you can either click execute at the top or press F5. When we hover over execute, it shows us that F5 is the hotkey in parentheses behind it. Once we do that, we'll get a result pane at the bottom. In here we can see that we have messages, and it tells us that the command completed successfully. However, if we look back over in our tree view under databases, we don't yet see the database we created. That's because this tree view does not refresh automatically. Instead, we can right-click on databases and click refresh, and now we see our database. Now, because we didn't give any parameters to the create database command except for the database name, it's got all default settings. If we right-click on our Simple SQL database and go into Properties, we can look and see what these settings were. This general page here just shows us some basic information about our database. When it was backed up, the name of it, the owner, the collation. However, the place where we want to look right now is our Options tab. Inside this Options tab, you're going to see an overwhelming number of settings. However, the thing that I want to draw your attention to is this one here called the Recovery Model. Currently, our recovery model is set to full, and we can see that we have three different options for it. We have full, bulk logged, or simple. Now, I'm not going to talk about bulk logged right now, but I do want to talk about full and simple. What the full recovery model means is every time you do something in the database, it keeps a record of it, and it never cleans that record up unless you specifically back it up. Now, the other choice that I want to talk about is simple, and what that means is each time you do something in the database, it cleans up the log file when it's done. What I would like us to do now, since we haven't learned about backing up databases yet, is switch over to the simple recovery model. Whenever you've done that, go ahead and click OK. Now, if all you want to know is how to create a database, you can go ahead and go on to the next video now. However, I'm going to go back into the properties and give you some more information about what has happened. The next tab that I want to look at, if you're still with me, is this Files tab. So the Files tab, in addition to being undersized, gives us some other information. It shows us the name of the two files that were created when we create our database and the path that they're in. You can see that we have the Simple SQL MDF file and the Simple SQL _log LDF file. What these are a data and a log file. So you can see here the MDF file is a rows data file. What that means is that it is where the database stores all of its information. So it stores your tables, your views, your stored procedures, all kinds of things that we're going to learn about. Any object that you make in the database or any data that you put into it goes into this file. The other file is a log file. What a log file is a file that holds in-flight information or transactional information. Now, as we discussed just a moment ago on the Options tab, if you're in full recovery mode, that in-flight information, it actually remains in the log file until you back the log file up. And the reason for this is so that you can back up just the log file multiple times throughout the day. And if at any point you have to restore from your backups, you can get to the last point at which you backed up the log. Now, with the simple recovery model, since the logs are flushed every time a transaction completes, you can't do that. You can only go back to the last place you backed up the entire database. The other thing that I want to point out here is that there is an auto growth setting on these files. And what that means is that as the files physically on the disk, and you can see the path again here, as the file on the disk runs out of space because you put data into it or because a transaction is too large, the file itself will grow on the disk. And the way it's set in our default settings here is it grows by 64 meg at a time. So if our database is currently 64 meg and it runs out of space, that means it'll become 128 meg and so on. And our data file can grow as much as it likes. Our log file can also grow as much as it likes because this default setting is larger than my hard drive. So now you can change these if you want. You can just click the three little buttons here. You can change that up. But I'm just going to leave them as they are right now because I don't expect to hit either of those limits. Also, I want to go ahead and take a quick peek at file groups. So file groups, you'll see that it comes with one. That's the primary file group, and it is marked as a default file group. And what that means is as you create objects in the database, so like we're going to make tables and views and all kinds of other stuff, as we make those, they're automatically going to be put into the primary file group because it is the default. And if we look back at our files, we can see that this file, our only data file, is part of the primary file group. What file groups are for is to help you organize your files. So if they were on, if you had several files and they were on different disks, you could use file groups to pick which disk things go to. So you might make an archive file group that's on a slower set of disks than your primary file group. And as you're done with data, you could move it to the archive prior to or instead of deleting it. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff in here. A lot of it is fairly advanced, and it's stuff that we're going to come back to later. But I did just want to give you the opportunity to understand how SQL Server makes its files and how those are organized. So in the next episode, we're going to look at a couple of basic data types within SQL Server. But this is it for now. So thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you later.